house just before we go. Okay,
All right.
we're ready.
We're ready. Okay. Welcome to another episode of On Location Prince George, brought to you with the support of TELUS Story Hive. Today I have Krystal Leason on the show. Krystal is the Executive Director with the Hubble Homestead, a historic site located on the Upper Fraser, just outside of Prince George. It's a museum that'll give you a glimpse into the early life of settlers in the area back in the 1900s. Krystal, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Hubble Homestead is an actual real homestead of the Hubble family, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And so how many of the actual structures that family lived in are still out there?
Well, when you visit the park today, there's 3 designated historic buildings on site. And by designated historic, I mean the Regional District of Fraser-Fort George has designated them important historical buildings in our area. So the most important one is, of course, the Hubble House, which was built in 1912 by Albert Hubble. It's the oldest building, still in its original location in our regional district. We also have the animal shelter. This is a bit of a one that's a little bit out of the way. People maybe have been there before and haven't seen it or haven't gone into it. It's just on the hill on the way, sort of just as you come down and you see the site, you can turn to the right and you can go up onto this little hill, and there's what's called the animal shelter there, and that's a building that we believe Hubble used for his pigs. So they were on site, but not right beside the house, because pigs, of course, are notoriously smelly. And then we also have the Salmon Valley Post Office. So this is the red building that's in the upper parking lot when you arrive. That was reconstructed in our upper parking lot in the year 2000. Because it's not actually from Hubble Homestead, it's from Salmon Valley, of course, which is why we call it the Salmon Valley Post Office. It was the home of Stearns and Gertrude McNeil, who lived in the house in the 1920s and then also had like a government library and a post office that they ran out of their house. And it was moved from Salmon Valley to our location, and so those are our 3 historic buildings. And then there's other buildings on site that either were constructed after the Hubbles left in the 1930s, or when the park was being restored in the 1980s to be more like the farm that they lived on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Take me through what the whole site looks like, because I know it's been converted into a museum, correct?
Yeah, historic site we call it, because it's multiple buildings, of course. It's not like you come into a visitor center or anything like that. We're a lot more rustic than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when you arrive, you sort of turn off the highway, you drive 6 kilometers down a gravel road, pass through some community pastures, so you might see cows on the way in. We have an upper parking lot where the post office is located, and it sort of looks like, I think if you're not sure where you are, you're like, am I in the right place? There's nothing here. But what you have to do is park, and then you have to walk down. There's a hill that goes down, and the site sort of opens before you, and you'll see the Fraser River on your left, because we're on the northern bend of the Fraser River. And yeah, it sort of opens up. There's 2 barns, there's multiple cabins, there's a beautiful 2-story squared log Hubble house. We have a general store, so you see that sort of from across the site. And so yeah, it's like a collection of buildings. A lot of times people will say, oh, it's like a mini Barkerville. Have you been to Barkerville?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Barkerville is like an 1860s gold rush town. And I understand why people say that it reminds them of Barkerville, because there's multiple buildings, they're old, it's kind of off the beaten path. But there's a pretty key difference, I guess, in that Barkerville's a town, and Hubble Homestead was never a town. It was just a homestead, really. And they had a trading business there. So people often think, too, that it's very remote and off the beaten path. But yeah, it is now that we're using highways. But people need to remember when they come that this was there before there was a road that passed by it. It was essentially on a really important transportation route. So the reason that Hubble Homestead is so important is because it is at the southern end of a trail, an ancient trail that connects the Fraser River, which flows south to the Pacific, to Summit Lake, which is in the headwaters of the Peace River system,
Oh, yeah.
and that flows to the north. So you have this, what's called Cladesti in by the Lake means the shortcut. It's the shortest land route between two water systems, crosses the Continental Divide, which divides watersheds. And this was the shortest route into the north in the early 1900s. Before, of course, First Nations people, the Lheidli had been using it for many years, centuries, to travel between their territory and that of Sicanni people, which live just to the north around Summit Lake and farther north. So it's an ancient trail. You can see that there's like culturally modified trees on it. You know, it has an ancient history. And, you know, before, when people were going into the north of the province, they didn't know about this trail. So you'd have to go west on like the Stewart and the Chaco rivers to Stewart Lake at Fort St. James. And then you'd have to get out and portage over a trail from Stewart Lake to McLeod Lake, which was like 3 to 5 days journey.
Yeah.
It's a huge, it's a huge undertaking to travel, you know, before cars anyway. But it was a long route. And it wasn't until the mid-1800s that this shortcut, Cladesti, was brought to public attention, to the attention of Canadians and Europeans who were wanting to get into the north through a shorter route, that this became an important trail for everybody as opposed to just the local First Nations people.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, that's interesting. That's a
yeah,
lot,
and
lot
so
of
that's
info.
it's a lot of context, but it's why Hubble Homestead is located where it is, because when people are traveling into the north of the province in the early 1900s, Hubble and Seebach recognized this and they set up a business there to capitalize on the traffic, which is all being funneled right through what's now called the Giscombe Portage, after the person who, quote unquote, discovered it, essentially the first non-native person to use it and then write about it. So John Giscombe was a Jamaican miner, actually, black miner from Jamaica. He was with his business partner, Henry McDame, who is also black from the Bahamas. They had been a part of the California gold rush in the United States in the 1860s, and 1850s, I guess. And then after the gold rush, California was like, there's way too many black people here for our liking. And they started, you know, life became really unpleasant for black miners in California. And so the governor of British Columbia, James Douglas, issued an invitation to black miners and said, if you don't like it in California, come to British Columbia. We have lots of gold that you can look for. And so they were part of this black migration in the 1860s. And by 1862, they're in Fort George spending the winter. And essentially they become the first non-Indigenous people to use Cladesti, the shortcut, which is between Fraser River and Summit Lake. And then Giscombe goes back to Victoria and writes about it in the newspaper. And so that's when people start to like realize there might be an easier way into the north. And then by the 1870s, when the Almanica Gold Rush happens, which is farther into the northern interior, that's when there's a petition by miners to build a wagon road to make it easier to get into the north. So the government builds a road that's more accessible. So that makes this trail more useful to people who are traveling. And then after that, it kind of like falls in usage until the early 1900s, when Hubble and Seebach arrived.
Holy cow, you know a lot about that.
Well, I hate to overload you, but there's a lot of steps. Like Hubble Homestead is important, and people think, oh, it's important because it's old, it's 100 years old or whatever. But it's not important because the Hubbles lived there. It's important because it's an important transportation route, way before the Hubbles arrived. Yeah. And so the Hubbles sort of give it a structural permanence by building there. And, you know, that's why our society got involved later on to save those buildings and the history of that particular family and what they are representing in that place. But the place itself is what's really important. And so that's why I'm always like, whoa, we got to rewind.
Wow, that's interesting. Who were those two men, Giscombe and?
So Giscombe and McDame were the
McDame.
two black miners. So once they essentially just pass through. They write about it. They bring it to essentially public consciousness. They go to the Dominica. McDame actually strikes gold, and so does Giscombe. Giscombe usually eventually returns to Victoria, and he eventually dies in Victoria. McDame Creek, which is in the northern interior of the province, is named after Henry McDame, this particular miner. So their history at Giscombe Portage, that because it's named, of course, after John Giscombe, as he writes about it, even though there's no real other reason for it to be named that. But yeah, they don't spend any real time there. They just use the route and write about it.
And get places named after them.
Yes, yeah.
Well, what impresses me about them are coming from the Bahamas and Jamaica
Yeah.
to Canada.
Northern BC, yeah.
Yeah, the weather
It's
is
gotta
not
be a
great here.
change.
And back then it must have been so hard and so cold.
Well, yeah, and that winter particularly, I think, was quite snowy, came early, was very cold. And, obviously we're living in a time of climate change, so we're getting really nice, relaxed winters for the most part. But yeah, winter, I think, in the 1860s was a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I bet it was. Yeah. Okay, so do you know then, did the Hubbles specifically build on that property because they knew that trail was going to be used?
Yes. So in the late 1890s, there are traders that set up fur trading posts there at the southern end of the trail. And so there's a couple different people that do it sort of on a seasonal basis. The Hudson's Bay Company in Fort George actually, in some of their reports, write about, Dunleavy's got his man Billy up there, and they're buying furs from Clately people and Sakani people, and we want that trade, so we should set up a competing post there too, just seasonally. So the Hudson's Bay Company does actually set up there's two trading posts there for some winters, because the Hudson's Bay Company doesn't like these private traders stepping in on their business. There is trade there at times throughout the 1890s. By 1903, it seems like the only trader that's really there is a Chinese man named Yi. And he has a long history of working with a man named Alexander G. Hamilton, A.G. Hamilton. Hamilton was like a great, promoter, developer of South Fort George. And so IE works with him for many years. We're assuming that IE is at the Portage in the early 1900s working with Hamilton. I don't think Hamilton is there himself, but I think he's there on behalf of Hamilton. And it's Hamilton who preempts the land that the Giscombe Portage trail comes out on. So preemption is essentially a way of transferring crown land to settlers. So the British Columbia government and Canada as well wanted settlers to live on the land, in part because it would solidify their claim to it. So it displaces First Nations people in favor of settlers who are going to use the land productively, quote unquote. So people that are going to farm or mine or do whatever they are doing, because the government believes that First Nations people using their territories, as they have always done, is not productive enough, I guess, when it comes to colonizing North America. So one way that they get settlers on the land is through the preemption process, which takes different forms at different times. But at this particular time, you can, if you're interested in a particular area of land, like a quarter section of land, you can preempt it, which is you file a claim and you say, I want this section of land and I will live on it for certain amounts of time. I will do certain improvements on it. So I'll build a house, I'll build a barn, I will fence a certain portion of it. And once you've made those improvements and someone has said, yes, we can attest that they've made these improvements, then you could get the land for essentially $1 an acre. So instead of paying full market value for land, you're getting a grant And so you're paying just a fraction of the price of what it would really cost to sell it. And so the preemption process is happening all around at that time. Before, it's happening earlier in southern parts of the province, but it's really starting to happen here around Prince George in the early 1900s and especially into the teens. So A.G. Hamilton preempts, puts a claim on the property that the Giscombe Portage, the southern end, where the southern end of the Giscombe Portage is. This happens in November of 1905. And like literally 2 weeks later, Albert Hubbell preempts the lot directly south of it. So like they're neighbors.
Okay.
And I just think it's really interesting. So IE's there, he's trading. It certainly seems as though Hubbell is trading there in competition with IE and Hamilton for at least one season, maybe 2 seasons.
Okay.
So, and by seasons, I mean winter seasons where people are bringing in furs because you trap for fur in the winter. And so Hubbell is there and IE is there. Hubbell in 1906 or so takes up and becomes a business partner with Ed Seabuck. So Edward Seabuck is definitely in the area by 1905 because he's mentioned in the Hudson's Bay Factors journals as like, you know, being in the area. Hubbell isn't mentioned until 1906, but Hubbell and Seabuck are doing business together at the Portage by the winter of 1906. And so that includes things like buying furs from First Nations traders like Claytley Tenay and the Sicanni people. They are probably trapping themselves. And after IE and Hamilton sort of pack up shop in 1907, Hubbell and Seabuck grow their business. So they're at this really strategic transportation location. So they're at the southern end of the trail that everyone's using to go to the north. There's quite a few people going through. By 1909, Hubbell keeps a diary, actually, and so he's often writing things like people passing through and keeping a record of what he's doing out there. So we know that they're buying furs, that they are guiding people through the dangerous rapids that are just south of where the homestead is.
Oh, yeah.
They are freighting your supplies across the portage. So if you've come up by Fraser River on a canoe, now you have to take a land route to get to the water again at Summit Lake. Do you want to carry your supplies and all in your canoe and all that across the 12-kilometer trail, or do you want to pay them to do it with
Right.
their horses? So you could pay them to do that for you. They open a general store, so they sell supplies to travelers. It's essentially like the last gasp.
Yeah.
You know, the prices are high, but, you know, this is the last store you're going to reach until maybe Fort St. John, because
Wow.
even like the Hudson's Bay Post at McLeod Lake, like they don't have enough supplies to sell to people. Certainly, they barely have enough supplies for them and the indigenous people that are living there. So, you know, they really have a bustling little business.
Yeah, sounds like quite the
right.
enterprise.
And yeah, so it's busy at the time, but it really gets busy in 1911-ish, I want to say, and 12 and 13, because that's when the railway comes through. So Prince George's history is really kind of focused on the coming of the railway, which comes from the east. They didn't know at first what side of the river it was going to go on, the tracks would go on, so they kind of were betting that the tracks were going to come onto the west side of the river, which is where Hubbell and Seabuck have their property. They actually go in on the other side. But since the waterways are the primary way that people are transporting themselves and their goods, everything is coming down the Fraser River right by them, right? So in those years, 1910, 11, 12, 13, the railway companies, all the contractors that they are working with, they're all bringing scows of men, scows of supplies, there's just like hundreds of people, it seems like, on the river every week. And they're stopping at Giscombe Portage, where Hubbell and Seabuck have their business, to camp overnight, to buy supper, to get supplies if they might need it. So it's really fascinating to see, and we've learned this by reading through Al Hubbell's diaries, is you can really see the explosion of people during that time. And then, as you keep reading the diaries, which we have his records from 1909 to 1919, reading through the whole thing really gives you a great picture of how industry is changing, how they're pivoting their business to take advantage of different opportunities. Once the railway goes in on the other side of the river and people stop coming up the river to their store and to the portage, they pivot to offering services starting in a different location. It's very, it's really fascinating to see how it's a period of intense development in Canada and in British Columbia, and specifically in the Prince George region, that 1909 to 1919.
Yeah.
It's really Prince George's major foundational years, I would say. Like, if you were here before 1909, you're like an old timer.
Oh, yeah.
If you're arriving in 1916, it's already pretty bustling little place. And Hubble, of course, is often in Fort George, not often necessarily, but frequently in Fort George, and so he's also documenting things that are happening in town too. So it's Hubble Homestead and Al Hubble and Ed Seabach and the diaries that Hubble kept are really wonderful resources for learning about how Prince George and the area developed, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Hubble Homestead, that, because I know Fort George is located on the Nechako, but not far from the Fraser, like where the confluence of the Fraser is, correct?
Well, Prince George has a really complicated settlement history in a sense, because there's the original town site of South Fort George, which is on the Fraser River. It's just south of where the Clately had one of their villages, and so settlers are in South Fort George. I'm not an expert on this, but there is a town promoter who essentially starts a rival town a couple kilometers away, 3 kilometers up the Nechako. So it's 3 kilometers down the Nechako from the Fraser, where the Fraser and the Nechako meet. So you have the Fraser River here flowing south, you have the Nechako meeting it. South Fort George is here, and Fort George is here. So South Fort George used to just be called Fort George, and they had to start calling themselves South Fort George because this town promoter created another little settlement that he called Fort George.
He just took the name.
And so then all the people in South Fort George were not super pleased about it, and so they had to
Jeez.
So they had to sort of rename, and essentially that there's a major rivalry between these two communities. They each have a paper, they're both talking smack about each other in the paper. And then when the railway is on its way here, the railway company doesn't want the tracks to go through either of those communities. So they essentially purchase the Clately-Tenays Reserve and decide that's where they're putting their town site. Instead of having the tracks go through their station in Fort George or South Fort George, they're going to make a new community, and it's called Prince George.
Okay.
Anyway.
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, it's a real schlemazel, I guess, is maybe the best word for it. But it's a really fascinating bit of history. Tragic for the Clately-Tenay, of course, because the railway company buys their land. It's not clear how the Clately understood that how that transaction was intended on the side of the railway company. I think the Grand Trunk Pacific obviously has European ideas of ownership, whereas Clately people and other First Nations people at that time and still believed that they were going to share the land. Obviously, the Grand Trunk Pacific didn't agree with that, and so the village that the Clately lived in was where they lived during the winter. Usually, Clately historically have been they follow what's called a seasonal round, where they move throughout their territory during different parts of the year, depending on what resources are available and where they are available. So in the fall, like in August, September, when the salmon run, there's no one in the village because they're all out on the rivers catching salmon during the salmon run. In the spring and the summer, as berries are ripening, they're out at their berry patches. They're not at their village. They're in their village in winter, for the most part. And then, of course, there's a few people that are there growing gardens and holding down the fort, you might say. But essentially, the railway company does not want this village on their land now that they have purchased. So they pay the Claytley Tenay a certain amount that this agreement is negotiated by like a Catholic priest on behalf of the Claytley Tenay. All the Claytley that sign with X's because they don't necessarily speak English or write English.
Or probably have any idea what they're even saying.
Well, and the question is what were they told by these negotiators? Like it's all very suspect. And then so they are promised as part of this deal that they will have houses built for them on one of their other reserves. So the Claytley technically have 4 reserves. The main one, number 1, is where Claytley Tenay Memorial Park is today. Okay. Number 2 is at Shelley, where most people know that Claytley have a reserve. And then there's 2 other smaller ones. Number 3 is like on the Nechako, and there are some families that live there. And then number 4 is really just kind of as far as I understand, like a seasonal place that they would sometimes go, but no one lived there all the time. In any case, they're promised new houses on reserve number 2 at Shelley, but the houses that are built there are very poor quality. They're made for like California climate, so they're drafty, they're freezing, they're not appropriate, and so they move back to their village at reserve number 1, and of course the railway doesn't like that. So what do they do but burn the houses down? So the Claytley literally can't return. So it's a real black spot on Prince George's history, and it forces the Claytley to live more fully at Shelley, at reserve number 2, which isn't very close to the center of things, obviously, right? If you think now of driving to Shelley.
It's a drive.
It's a drive
in a car, yeah.
Now imagine there's no cars, you don't have a car, or whatever reasons. Like, how do you participate in the growing economy that essentially you have to participate in because your land is being settled and your access to it is being restricted? You're being forced into a Western economy, but you can't reach the center of commerce at the same time. It's very, it's really tragic and very sad. And essentially, downtown Prince George is on that land that they bought from the Claytley. And the only piece now that is still just theirs, I don't know if maybe that's not even quite correct, but is essentially the cemetery at the park. Because they have like a Claytley cemetery there in Claytley Tenay Memorial Park. Yeah. So essentially, Prince George grows up on what was Claytley Tenay Reserve land, and eventually the 3 communities do combine to become the city we know, I guess. But this is not until about 1915, I guess. So by 1915, things are shifting away from people are moving out of South Fort George to Prince George. And then, South Fort George has its own little history, but the main center of the town becomes then Prince George, and it's where we are now in the downtown core.
Okay. And do you know what the Hubble area is doing around this time?
So Hubble is still out there. Hubble and Seawalk are still at the Portage, conducting their business. By 1914, when the railway is operating, things start to pivot for them. So whereas people who were heading into the north before would come up the Fraser River by canoe, they would get out at Hubble Homestead, and they would cross the trail to Summit Lake. Either they'd pay Hubble and Seawalk to carry their things, or they would carry it themselves. They'd get back in the water in Summit Lake, and then you would take the Crooked River, and eventually you would meet up with the Peace River farther north. That's how people were getting into the north until the railway was finished. So then by the time the railway is built to Prince George, people will, instead of coming up the Fraser from Prince George, is they take the train from Prince George up to a point further up the Fraser at what's now Hansard. They would then unload their canoe and all their supplies and come down the river to the northern bend, and then they would get out, and then they would cross the portage to go to Summit Lake and into the north. But if you're going to the east, like if you were heading east to Edmonton or wherever, whereas originally you would be taking the river, the Fraser, you'd pass Hubble Homestead and you would keep going up the upper Fraser. Now you just take the train. So all that traffic is cut. So Hubble and Seabox start advertising. You see in 1914 in the paper, they have advertisements that say, ship your goods to mile 291, or whatever the mile number is, which is essentially Hansard. They have an agreement with someone that lives there. Ship care of George McDowell to mile whatever, and then we'll pick it up Wednesdays and deliver it to Summit Lake for you. So now they've shifted to freighting these people's goods from the railway to Summit Lake. We're like, we'll take it for you. You don't have to do it. We'll take it.
Yeah.
So they're pivoting. By 1915-ish too, Al Hubble, who had gotten married in 1911 and brought his wife back, they have kids. Eventually, the kids are going to school in Fort George, and so his wife Annie is often spending winters in Prince George with the children so that they can go to school year round. They're starting to diversify their business interests a little farther north. Like they're setting up a trading post at McLeod Lake, for instance. They eventually set another one up farther north. So they're pretty savvy businessmen. They've got their finger on the pulse of what's going on, and you can see them adapting to all the changes that are happening in the region.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So if they were shipping up the river, they were kind of taking over or taking from the railway and shipping up the river. Did they have like big paddle wheelers or anything, or do you know what they were operating?
So steamers were common on the upper Fraser up until about 1914. The problem is so awful. The problem is when the railway is built, they build several bridges over the upper Fraser, which means that at a certain point, steamers can't get through. Like they can't go under them because they're too big. Prince George has a railway bridge even today, it was built in 1913-14. It was intended to open to let steamer boats pass through. That apparently was only opened once, and after that, there's always an excuse for the railway to not open it. Oh, there's a train coming. Oh, it's too much work. Like all these things. Essentially, they drive the steamer companies out of business. And later, when the steamer companies complain or bring a lawsuit against the government's kind of just like, sorry, we need a railway. And so, too bad for you. So, steamers were really common on the rivers from about 1909 until 1913-ish, especially on the upper Fraser. Not really common per se, but they were certainly going up all the way to Tijon in some cases, which means they have to pass through the Grand Canyon of the upper Fraser, which is quite scary and deadly. So they were getting traffic in that way as well before the railway comes, and then after that they start focusing on like different aspects of getting people to their location or essentially offering them services in other ways. But the steamers were really an icon of the upper Fraser for a good, like you'll see pictures around the city, like historic photos and restaurants and stuff of steamers on the upper Fraser. But really they only were up there for 5 years or so. Farther down the Fraser, they were probably more common before that, and even sometimes they were going up the Nechako as well. But the glory days of the steamer on the upper Fraser, the paddle wheeler on the upper Fraser, was relatively short-lived.
It was, yeah. I mean, up here we even have the BX pub.
The BX pub, and the thing is, so the BX came to Fort George, but the BX never went farther than Fort George. The BX had a sister ship, a smaller one called I think it was called the BC Express. So you have the BX and you have the BC Express, and that's the smaller one that would go up the upper Fraser. So that one stops at Hubble Homestead. There's pictures of one called the Chilcotin. I think it's called the Chilcotin at the docked at Hubble Homestead, or not docked per se, but anchored there. And Hubble even writes that he writes when they come by and they take goods off there. Like they get shipments essentially delivered by steamer boat in the early days because it's not cheap, but it's easier than hauling it all up on your own.
Holy, you know everything about all this. It's crazy.
Well, I've been around for a while, so I
Yeah.
should hope that I know most of it by now. Hopefully people are interested. I'm really interested.
I'm interested.
In it.
I'm looking at the time going, oh man.
Yeah,
we're going
time flies
flying
when
through
you
this.
get me talking about Hubble Homestead.
Yeah. Do you know, like with all this information, you're like, you've got this wealth of information about the location and it goes back 100 years,
Yeah.
more than 100 years. Are you learning anything new nowadays?
Yeah, well, yeah, we are actually. We're 5 years into a project centered on the Hubble diaries. So we had a transcription of Al Hubble's diaries since the 1980s. The Hubble family, who lived in Prince George, still do live in Prince George, had his historic diaries from that time, and they loaned them to a volunteer of our society in the 1980s. And it's kind of funny to think about how this was done, but essentially he read, I think, aloud into a tape recorder the diaries, and then a student at the exploration place transcribed them, like typed them out on a typewriter, and then they were edited by Kent Sedgwick, who was a local, I want to say, like city planner who had an interest in history and especially Giscon Portage and what the Hubbles were up to, and one of our society directors. So there has been since the mid 80s a printed version of Al Hubble's diaries transcribed out with footnotes from the editor, from the person who read it, Curly Whitty, from Kent Sedgwick, from June Chamberlain, who was on our board, essentially trying to explain some of the things that aren't obvious or didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
When, in 2020, the Hubble family donated the actual diaries to our society. And so this was the
In
first...
2020?
Just in 2020, yeah.
Wow, recent.
So this was the first time that we really saw the diaries, got to look at them, see his writing, and it was really exciting. And so we were like, oh, well, we should scan these so we have a copy of them. Luckily, at that time, the university, the Northern BC Archives at UNBC, had just gotten a book scanner, because a book scanner is a special, it's not a flat surface, it has like a peak so that you don't, so when you're trying to scan like delicate books, you don't have to press
You're
it
not
flat. Because we were kind of thinking, how are we going to get these scanned? Like, I was really nervous. I didn't really want to send them by mail anywhere, because essentially to like Edmonton or Vancouver or somewhere. So we found out Northern BC Archives had just got this book scanner. They let us use it for free, which was incredible. So we got all 11 diaries scanned. So we have PDF versions of all of the diaries. And so then we started reading them, and we were like, oh, we started comparing it to the transcription, and we realized there was quite a few errors in it, just partly because the original volunteer, I don't know if he didn't really get a hang of Hubble's handwriting, I think, because they're just like, oh, this isn't that word, it's actually, he's written this instead of that, or whatever. And so we started going through and correcting the transcription. And while we were doing that, we were like, man, he sure mentions a lot of people in here. And so we started a spreadsheet that essentially has 400 unique names in it over an 11-year period. He writes down 400 names, and some of them are in there many, many times. So we started doing research on those people. Who are they? Are they, local settlers? Are they Clately people? Are they Sekani people? Are they... Turns out some of them are, authors and writers. And not even that he...
Really?
One of the really fun things we have discovered is that sometimes he'll write... So, for instance, one day he wrote, Lavoie and partner, go through. And he does that a lot. He'll name a person and say, and partner. And we thought, oh, that's kind of whatever. And then we realized that these two people are not in business together. The person he names is a guide, and the person that he doesn't name is a person being guided that he doesn't know. Turns out Lavoie is guiding an author named Paul Hayworth who goes home and writes a book about his travels and includes meeting Hubble and Seebach and
And that's in his book.
in his book. And so
wow.
and now with the miracle of the internet, you
Yeah.
can find a copy of Paul Hayworth's book where he talks about Hubble and Seebach and describes the place. And like there's all these little instances of that. And so essentially this little double checking of the transcription project has turned into a 5-year massive project where we've done research on almost all of these names. Some of them are obvious. Some of them are in the newspaper. We have a former genealogist on our volunteer list who has researched more than 80 of the names just to see like why they're here, who are they. So we have a trove of information on all these people. We've also made annotations of the entries. So, if he says something planted Dutch sets, like what are Dutch sets? Well, they're onion sets, actually. He's planting onion bulbs. Or, we're using the annotation section to describe things that are unique to our area or things that are unique to the geography of Giscombe Portage. Or, like he means this when he says this, or this is now called this and it's here. So the intention of the project is that visitors will eventually be able to see Hubble's original writing and a transcription of that, because it's sometimes difficult to read, and then also any notes that sort of shed light on what he's talking about. So the context and, just like who is he talking about? Is this his kid? What, all these different things. Essentially, it's painted a picture of the area that I think we were underestimating. I think we were underestimating the place beforehand, because we were focused on, of course, the Hubble family, which was important when you talk about how the park was created, and in the sense that we talked to some of the Hubble children that were still alive and got oral history from them, and it was a place where we would interpret the history of the Hubble family. But there's much more to it than that, because the Hubbles had a thriving business there that reached quite an area, and had, I think, speaks a lot to the development of our region as a whole, and even into the north. Like, he's recording politicians going through and all these political things, and he's not talking a whole lot about current events, but he does sometimes, and it sort of sheds light on how news is arriving, and how, you think of Giscombe Portage being a pretty isolated little place in 1900, but it's actually connected to the whole world. They're shipping furs to London, they're ordering supplies from Ontario. Like, things are already, our world is already way more interconnected by the 1910 than you think it is. It's just, I think it's really fascinating. And so what we're doing is we're working on finding grant funding to turn this into a website so that people can explore it at their leisure. Genealogists can use it, historians can use it, students can use it. So we want to, get this into the hands of high school students who are learning local history, who want to see primary documents. Anyway, it's a really exciting project, and I'm really encouraging all of the applicants that I have submitted applications to fund it.
Well, it sounds like a huge project, and when you talk about like the interconnection of everything happening in Prince George and underestimating kind of the significance of the site, I believe it. Like you're like, at this point, you're just kind of going on, some documentation, some old structures and stuff.
Yeah.
But, it was 100 years ago. You really have no idea. Like, if he didn't write it in his journal.
Well, the really fascinating part is that he writes it in his journal, and it's also backed up by the newspaper and other people's writings. Like, it's at the center of a web. Hubble Homestead is at the center of a web. If you're interested in a particular type of history, there's a connection to Hubble Homestead. You want to learn about Black history, it's there. You want to learn about First Nations history, you betcha. You want to talk about women and families on the frontier, it's there. You want to talk about railway, transportation, river travel, economics. Like, it's got everything. If you're interested in it, there's a tie to Hubble Homestead in some way, and you don't know that unless you come and see us and ask us, or hopefully you can visit the diary website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting to me. I love hearing this history stuff,
Yeah.
like how this region kind of developed and grew and even shifted, right?
Yeah.
Like how things changed.
Yeah.
Do you know, like maybe based on the writings or based on anything you have there, what life was actually like for them living here and getting started?
I think life is tough for anyone that is settling in remote areas in Canada. Like, you know, if you, even when we talk a lot about Claytley history as well. We have a program on site that school children can come and learn about, like, the history of the Claytley Tenay and their traditional life. And I'm always, and even when we talk about the Claytley Tenay or we talk about the Hubble family or other settlers, I'm always like, think about try to imagine how it feels, like how cold is it? Like, you don't have a furnace, you don't have central heating,
Yeah.
you don't have hot water on demand. If you want to be warm, you need to light a fire, you need to keep going. Life is not easy. And I think that the diaries really illustrate how much work they're doing. Like, early on, he'll say, like, oh, Sunday, stayed at home and wrote letters. But there's not a whole lot of days where he's not doing something. And, once you bring children into the mix, now you have all this extra work that your wife is doing that he doesn't even write about her work. But you can assume that she is, cooking. And I'm not saying that she's doing all the cooking, because they actually were pretty well off and hired a cook at some points, it seems like. But, you've got several kids, you've got no power. Prince George at the time is becoming electrified. It's getting running water. But out at the homestead, there's nothing. Or you think about people settling on the prairies or whatever, you're exposed to the elements. You have virtually no money. You may not have anywhere to buy anything. The Hubble family is pretty unique in a sense, and that they have a bit more access and privilege than other settlers, in a sense, like, they're running a business, so they can order supplies, not only for people that want to buy them, but they could order supplies for themselves, through their connections. They have, like, a lot of horses and wagons and stuff, so they can transport themselves relatively easily. But, you read some of the accounts of settlers in the north, especially ones that live farther north than Prince George, so, like, up at, like, Finley Junction or whatever. Just, like, the accounts that you read, or of, like, trappers that are working in the north, it just sounds, I don't want to say awful.
Yeah, no, it was
It's certainly
awful.
like absolutely foreign to how we live today. But, and then you also read people that are like, I wouldn't have traded it for the world, because they loved every moment of it. Well, in retrospect, of course, they loved every moment of it. Or, it was simpler in a lot of senses, but it was difficult in many, many ways. There isn't a lot of rest. There's a lot of vigilance and a lot of effort that goes into surviving in a climate like this. Whether you're Claytley 1,000 years ago or a settler 100 years ago, it was not easy.
Yeah. And then I imagine, like you said, there were pigs on the site, right?
Hubble does occasionally mention butchering pigs and making bacon.
Oh, yeah. My favorite part of the pig.
Isn't it?
Okay. So what about, like, other animals? Did he have cattle? Because
Well, they had a lot of horses, and so that is primarily, I think, for freighting. But they also have some horses that they obviously are just saddle horses, because he talks a lot about Dennis, the saddle horse. At first we were like,
Dennis?
what do you mean Dennis? And then he's like, rode Dennis to Summit Lake. I'm like, okay, so Dennis is a horse.
oh, that'd be fun figuring all that out.
Yeah, they have. He mentions several horses. He mentions Dennis, Molly and Brown, and Pansy, for sure. I don't think they have cows. Hubble does a lot of farming, so he grows a lot of oats and things. But it sort of sounds like he's growing oats for oat hay. Like, he harvests it before it would be mature, so he must be using it as hay.
Yeah.
Because seems like they have quite a lot of horses, and they're obviously feeding them out of their own efforts.
Because he's got a shipping company, so yeah.
Well, yeah,
Makes
you're
sense.
you're hauling stuff all over the place, so you need several teams of horses, presumably. And they also like employ local men, like not just settlers. They also employ like Clately men who cut firewood or do certain jobs at certain times of the year for Hubble and Seabach in exchange for money. And they have hired men, like settler guys, during different seasons. So there's definitely like an additional aspect of work going on there. We have a photo of one of the Hubble children feeding ducks, so they must have had ducks, but Hubble doesn't mention them. He doesn't mention chickens or anything. So some of what we know about what the Hubbles were doing is from family recollection. It's not all in his diary. He's very terse. Maybe terse isn't the right word. He's not loquacious by any means. The diaries only have very small entry spaces, so.
Yeah. Well, you don't know somebody's going to read it later.
Well,
right?
you know, and he's not writing it for us. He writes it
Yeah.
for himself. It's a record. A lot of farmers had diaries because they wanted to know when they seeded things and when they harvested things. And in a lot of senses, his diary is mostly a business record in addition to other, like he obviously has other business records, but some of them have lists of things that he ordered for the store or people's tabs in them. And so there's little bits and stuff, but he doesn't mention everything. So some of it, like, we know that they didn't have sheep. We had sheep at the homestead for many years. We don't any longer, but we had sheep because it was convenient for us.
Oh, okay.
Not because the Hubbles had them, but they did have chickens. They had ducks. They had pigs. They had horses. I don't know if they had cows or not. At one point, they had a pet moose.
A pet moose?
Well, a pet
Yeah.
moose. They rescued a baby moose
Uh-huh.
who apparently would let himself into the house
Oh, yeah.
and walk
okay.
through the parlor and then exit.
But they kept it.
Well,
or
till he
for-
was big enough that he could move out on his own. Yes. You think?
Good one, yeah. Have you thought of like leveraging AI now with AI being able to do research and stuff and find information? I'm just thinking of like that book, right? The author wrote a book. There could have been so many people. There could have been, like you said, a politician, right? Could have
I
diaries.
think that we've pretty much reached the limit of what the diary is going to tell us on our own steam. I personally have a lot of reservations about AI. I just don't.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think that, my job is partly to do research, and I don't want to that's my favorite part of the job. Why do I want a machine to do it?
But it could be a good starting point.
I suppose.
Like, it could connect the
our
dots.
research is pretty much complete at this point. We're mostly just cleaning things up. It's because we undertook this before AI became like the buzzword, I guess. So
Yeah.
we've been working at it since 2020, and so no, I don't think anyone in our office wants to give up this really cool part of the job.
Oh yeah. I'm like thinking about volunteering.
Google's been incredible. Like, just being able to, just having the ability to type in, like, sometimes you read, you're trying to decipher something he's written, and you're like, could it be this? Could it be that? And I'm just like typing random letter combinations into Google, sort of, in a sense. And yet, it has turned some things up, and you're like, oh my gosh, we've solved this little historical mystery. And you're like, what do you mean when you say, when you write something? And I'm like Googling it, and I'm like, oh, that's a person's name, as it turns out. And that person was here at some point. And Google has been a miracle for us. Like, this research would have been incredibly tedious and almost impossible, I think, before Google, in a sense. Like, some work had been done by like Ken Sedgwick in particular, but the ability to have the World Wide Web at our fingertips really wasn't a major impact. And I don't know. Personally, I never think of AI, so maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just referring to
Yeah.
connecting the dots, especially if you've got 400 names, right?
Yeah, and we've pretty much, though, got them all most of them nailed down. Some of them are just too vague. It says like, Peters. And you're like, okay, cool. Or there's a lot of names that are also just words. And you're like, well, how am I going to search the citizen database for that?
Oh, yeah.
So there's a few things that we could maybe try it out on some of those things. But, you know, you have to also accept there's limits to, like, you can't unlock every secret of this diary. Or, you know, he was sometimes wrong, too. We found, like, instances where he doesn't have it quite right, and we know better.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, we're like, he doesn't spell things the same all the time or whatever. He's like, you know, sometimes you're just like, we don't even know if this is the person that was here, if he spelt it right. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's a totally different person. Like, we will say, like, this is likely this person because this seems like the likeliest option.
Yeah.
But we could be wrong too.
Yeah. I guess you never know. But
Yeah.
at least it's something that you're kind of like, you're able to kind of keep digging into the history and learn
Yeah.
what things were like at the time.
And it's really, like I said, it's really painted a different picture of what was going on there.
Yeah.
For me, even as someone that's been there 20 years, I just kind of was like, wow, there's way more to this than we have been historically interpreting to visitors. Like, the stuff we talk to visitors about is interesting.
Yeah.
If you ever get a tour from me at Hubble Homestead, you're going to get a different tour
Oh, yeah?
than anyone else because I know all this stuff. So I'm gonna randomly sprinkle it through.
Okay. And you do tours yourself?
On occasion, like if I'm there, and
Oh, okay.
someone needs a tour, I'll give a tour. But, you know, our summer staff isn't giving you these tours because they have the book. So after we have finished this diary project, we will be revisiting our interpretive program to making sure that some of what we've learned gets added in there, so that a more broad picture of the place can be painted for people. And I mean, the school tours, for instance, focus more on the Hubble family because that's
Right.
what
Yeah.
kids can more easily use, you know, the framework of a family to understand how they lived 100 years ago. You know, I'm not going to talk to grade 2s about freighting.
Yeah.
But, you know, for adult tours, like, I think it's really fascinating and it really
Yeah.
broadens the picture.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about it because we really branched off and it
Yeah.
was really interesting.
Sorry.
But I want to know a little bit more about the location and kind of what a visitor, like I told you, I haven't
Yeah.
been there before. So now it's my first time visiting the site. Let's talk a little bit about like walking through the homestead and walking through the various locations and what you have there to see.
So first of all, we're open. We're not open year round. We're open from mid-May, usually Victoria Day weekend, to Thanksgiving weekend, because it's in a snow belt. It's really snowy.
Yeah.
You can't really. We don't have power even still. We don't have running water. So it's, you know, it's still got its challenges for sure. And winter is just, the tourism just isn't there in the winter. So we're open during the nice season, and so we're open every day from May long weekend until Labor Day, and then weekends through the fall to Thanksgiving. Essentially, when you come out, if you come out, you might come for one of our public event days. We have about 8 to 10 public events throughout the season. So we focus on different aspects of the history, or, you know, we do have like a kids carnival, which is really popular, where families come and play carnival games and see magic shows and things like that. Homestead Days is our longest running event. It's our most old-fashioned event, and so we focus a lot on historic demonstrations like butter making, ice cream making, blacksmithing, things like that. We have other Halloween is a big is a big one for us as well. We reopen for Halloween and turn the Hubble House into a house of horrors. Have pumpkin carving, a maze, and things like this. So there's lots of different event days. So if you are a person that wants to go to something with lots of stuff to do, the event days are nice because there's always different activities happening. But you can come out on any day that you want because we're open whenever. We give guided tours on demand. So you can get a guided tour from a staff member whenever you show up. We have a general store that we operate, so you can step into the store. You can buy old-fashioned candy. You can buy a lot of locally made goods and crafts. You can buy lunch, hot dogs or hamburgers, pancakes if you're there in the morning. ice cream, pie, all that stuff. And so we also do school programming, as I sort of mentioned, was teachers will book for their classes and they come out and they have chosen what activities what they want to do, whether that's a tour and ice cream making or like a scavenger hunt type game or a treasure hunt. So there's all these different things that they can book. So we're quite busy throughout the year. If you arrive on a regular day, it's probably going to be pretty quiet. Everyone's really surprised when they show up on a Wednesday afternoon and there's no one else there except the staff.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, oh, and you're like, yeah, maybe we're not as popular as you think we are. I don't know. But yeah, so it's often it can be a really intimate visit if you want it to be, or you can just say, oh, we'll offer you a tour when you come, and if you're not interested, you just say, oh, no thanks, and we'll say, okay, if you have any questions, just let us know. And so you can explore on your own. We have I don't know, I've lost the word here, printed signs, essentially, signage for the buildings, so if you don't want a tour, you can just read about them a little bit. So when you arrive, you come down the hill, and you'll see 2 cabins on your left. That's Seabach's cabin, which is where Seabach would have lived. Ed Seabach had his cabin on sort of this side, the close side of the creek. We also have a functional blacksmith shop. So if you come on an event day, we sometimes have a blacksmith working in there. So you can maybe get a nail to take home, or have you smell that coal fire.
Yeah.
But generally, you can come in through the welcome barn, and so there's often some interpretive panels in there. If it's an event day, there'll be a staff member in there to greet you. And so yeah, if you wanted to get a tour, that's usually where you'll be offered the tour. You can take a guided brochure if you want. You go through, we have another big barn. It has an upstairs loft you can go up to. We have a lot of weddings up there, actually. This is available for rentals. And then you can visit the historic Hubble House. Yeah. So you can go right in the front door into the parlor, see the Hubble family's actual piano. If you go into Al Hubble's office, just off the parlor, you'll see Al Hubble's original desk. We know it was his because in the 1980s, when they were restoring the park, one of the volunteers was fixing the desk up, noticed the drawer didn't really work right, pulled his 1911 diary out from the back.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's there. We've got you can visit the Hubble bedroom, essentially, Al and Annie Hubble's bedroom. Upstairs, if you go upstairs, there's rooms for the kids. So they had 7 kids together, I want to say. Annie Hubble had 10 kids altogether. And she brought her youngest with her when she came out in 1911. Well, the other 2 stayed home with their grandparents to go to school. But eventually, her son did move to the area and was a trapper. And so, yeah, you can see the children's bedrooms, learn about, people that were passing through could spend $1 or $2 to sleep in a bed overnight if they wanted to, pay for supper, or they were welcome to camp on the riverbank. We also have what's called the flat roof cabin, which was essentially the cabin Hubble and Seabach lived in their first winter, and then eventually was turned into their first general store, and then later into a place that people could rent for the night. Oh, yeah. And then the most exciting part of the store for most people is the general store, which I mentioned is it was actually rebuilt in 1997 because they took the original down and reused the lumber when they built the cabin at Summit Lake in the 1920s.
Oh, really?
But yeah, the store has been rebuilt in 1997 and offers locally made goods and sweets and food, and it's everyone's favorite place because it's like the most alive, I guess. Everything's wood. You come in and it just smells good, and it's a really nice place to be. And then we have a lot of green space as well. So on event days, most of the activities that we're hosting, whether it be cheese making or the wood lathe or games, like they're all happening outside, maybe under a tent, but we have a lot of green space, so there's room for kids to run around. There's games that we run with prizes on event days. School kids have lots of fun out there. We have a picnic shelter, so you can sit under some shade and have a lunch if you like. And yeah, so it's interesting because when when you come down the hill, you don't necessarily expect it to look like it does because it suddenly like opens up to pasture, and you have all these buildings. You have the river right there. A lot of people come down and are like, "Oh, wow." I don't know. They didn't expect it. They don't know what river they're on. They don't.
Yeah.
They're surprised it's so close. You can take a walk right along the river trail. If you want, there's a couple different ways to get down there. We also have the Claytley Tenay Fish Camp exhibit. In 2005, we worked with Claytley Tenay to build an exhibit of what a temporary summer fish camp would have looked like around the turn of the century. So that's a great jumping off point to talk about Claytley history, about how important salmon are to them. And so we have a lot, there's a lot going on, I guess, at Hubble Homestead. Even if it's quiet, we're still, sweeping and tending the rabbits and the chickens and mowing lawns and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like there's enough to keep you busy for a day if you. make a trip
And the nice thing is, it's not that far, so it's about a half-hour drive. So you don't have to spend the whole day. Like, you would go to Barkerville and you're like, well, we've traveled this far, we should stay all day. And there's so much to do. That's fine. But Hubble Homestead is nice because it's closer, so it doesn't have to be the whole day if you don't want to, but it can be the whole day if you do. Many people come on event days and they're there almost all day long. They have lunch, they do all the activities, they relax a little bit. You can come out any day, just like hang out, read a book, take a walk on the river trail. There's like zero expectations of you there. Like, you come and you can just you can use the park how you want to, in a sense. Like, no, you can't camp there, you can't have a fire, but you can bring a picnic if you want. We allow outside food, so you can bring your own picnic. You can buy lunch there. You can donate or not donate if you don't have the cash. Like, it's pretty chill. I want to say, but it's really beautiful. When you go, you can tell it's a special place. Yeah. And you don't know why, but it is.
Okay. So mid-May comes around and you're open and somebody wants to show up, they just basically drive there, show up, and make
no
a donation,
reservations necessary. Even on event, like, there's we have certain events that require registration just because of the nature of that event. Like, we have a murder mystery, for instance, where you do need to buy tickets.
That sounds fun.
It's really fun. Yeah. We worked our way through the decades from the 19-teens to the 1990s. This year we rolled the dice and we're on the 20s, but we'll probably start working our way through again. Wow. We have one new event last year was called Hubble After Dark, where you could come book a ticket, you come just before sunset, and then you got a tour of the place in the dark, and you got to hear stories that we don't usually tell. Just some of the darker stories.
Little scarier stories,
Yeah, not necessarily horror. They're not horror stories, but they're just sort of like tales we don't tell the average person.
Okay.
But yeah, you can come out anytime, and if you have a group that you want to bring and do activities, then we would ask that you book. So you can book through our website. Tell us what you want. You pay after you leave. It's
okay.
Yeah, we're pretty like low stakes, I guess, but
awesome.
We have a lot of fun and looking forward to the next season.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to make it out there this year.
Yeah,
and looking
we'd love
forward
to see you.
to mid-May and onward.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Krystal, thanks a lot. I mean, we've been talking for over an hour, and it was so much information. It was great. No, if somebody wants a tour with you, what days do you work out there?
Well, mostly you'll never know. I guess you don't know when I'm out there. You might catch me. I'm out there on event days, and I'm not giving tours on event days, but I'm out there on event days. If you want to chat history, catch me in the barn usually. But other than that, you can always email us. We can talk on the phone or have coffee or whatever if you're really interested. All of our staff are excellent, give excellent tours, so you're gonna hear different stuff than what I told you today. Okay. Anyway, but most of our history is also on our website if you're interested in reading it instead of listening to it. HubbleHomestead.ca has most of it as well. And just remember, Hubble is spelled with one B.
One B. Okay. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.